One. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the July 13th Board of Education meeting. And first of all, I really want to apologize. We had some technology challenges with audio, so we are late. And I recognize that there were several people waiting, so thank you for waiting. And welcome to our Board of Education meeting. So the Board of Education is meeting remotely in accordance with Section 6 of the Illinois Executive Order issued on March 16, 2020. Can we have a roll call, please?
Day.
Here.
Livingston.
Here.
Munsell.
Here.
Parsons.
Here.
Rolowitz.
Here.
Teterich.
Here.
Savage Williams.
Here. Thank you. So the first item on the agenda is written communication. Is there any written communication, Dr. Davis?
We have no written communication today.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda is comments from the public. Dr. Davis, do we have comments from the public?
Yes, we have 8 comments from the public, and I will read them for the board.
Okay, thank you.
The first public comment is from Betsy Lehman. The Evanston Township High School District 202 Board of Education has on its agenda for today safety at ETHS and school resource officers. As advocates for dead, disinvested Black and Brown youth in our community, the Moran Center for Youth Advocacy has been asked to provide our perspective on ETHS's school resource officers program in advance of today's meeting. Anticipating this discussion in the near term, it has been our plan to personally connect with board members, administrators, and police officers to share our view on this topic. Given, however, the board's decision to quickly move ahead in discussing this issue, we are unfortunately limited in our ability to engage in meaningful dialogue and instead must rely on written correspondence. We plainly urge the board to remove the 2 assigned school resource officers from their permanent post on campus, and if not presently inclined to do so, at the very least, delay action to allow for a more robust community dialogue on this issue. The close proximity of law enforcement to students on campus directly contributes to the local school to prison pipeline. Despite the best efforts of ETHS's SROs to divert youth from the juvenile justice system and employ restorative interventions, the SROs play an inherent role in policing, investigating, and arresting ETHS students. And when officers are employed in a full-time capacity on campus, they inevitably become involved in situations where their involvement is unwarranted and causes matters to escalate unnecessarily. To illustrate, the Moran Center has witnessed the following scenario multiple times at ETHS. A student engages in physically aggressive act on school grounds. The SROs are invited to intervene, and then, due to the officer's mere presence, the complaint presses for the SRO to arrest the aggressor, a student. As exemplified here, the proximity of law enforcement, regardless of their intentions, contributes to the criminalization of student misbehavior. To be clear, our call to action is not in response to the officers currently assigned to ETHS, but rather a response to the policy of permanently stationing officers at ETHS. The Moran Center does not discount the transformative restorative contributions being made by officers from the Evanston Police Department, including ETHS SROs Tanya Jenkins and Lois Spells. But focusing on personalities, even friends like officers Jenkins and Spells, distracts from the structural and systemic harm caused by their positions. We appreciate ETHS's SRO's engagement in mediating student conflict, counseling, and de-escalation. However, we firmly believe that within the school environment, these are roles best suited for social workers, psychologists, teachers, and staff, not law enforcement. We therefore urge the board to invest in ETHS's current internal restorative efforts and continue the expansion of student mental health services. We, of course, support efforts by law enforcement in building community relationships, but that objective can be accomplished outside of the school environment. By urging the removal of SROs from ETHS, we are not advocating for police officers to be precluded from forging critical community relationships, particularly with Evanston youth. On the contrary, we commend officers' current efforts to build a more restorative community through programs such as the Officer and the Gentleman's Academy, Star Academy, as well as the Moran Center's partnership with EPD Project Bridge, and encourage the expansion of these initiatives. Nationally, Regionally and locally, school districts are removing SROs from school campuses and reimagining school safety. For example, Oak Park River Forest High School decided on July 9, 2020 to terminate the school district's existing intergovernmental agreement with the Village of Oak Park for school resource officers being assigned to OPRF. And although Evanston-Skokie District 65 fell short of terminating its memorandum of understanding with the city of Evanston for the assignment of 2 school resource officers last year, District 65 took significant steps on October 7, 2019 in transforming the role of its SRO. District 65 now exclusively employs SROs in emergency planning, review, and perimeter patrols, as opposed to utilizing the services to de-escalate students, quote, relying instead on increasing the internal capacity of school to address students in crisis, close quote. Encouragingly, District 65 shift in policy resulted in 0 students being arrested during the 2019-2020 school year. We implore the board to thoughtfully consider the precedent established by these educational partners and take similar action. We are then sensitive to ETHS administrators' concerns that by removing SROs from their permanent position on campus, students, faculty, and staff become more vulnerable to lethal violence, including school shootings. Although the prospect of ETHS being a target of a school shooting is statistically low, quote, statistics seem cold and irrelevant, the victims are children, we don't think about it in risks in terms of 1 in a million. The only thing we think of is our kids could be next. So even the tiniest risk appears unacceptably high, close quote. Administrators are, of course, well-intentioned in their impulse to station law enforcement within the school to mitigate school violence. However, this grave concern must be balanced against these actions, meanwhile, harm students, particularly Black and brown students. Beyond the criminalization of student misbehaviors, research has shown that police presence in the school environment can have a damaging impact on students' physical and psychological well-being, as well as their academic outcomes. Frequent student interactions with police can act as a psychological trigger and over time result in anxiety, lack of motivation, and aggressive behavior. In a 2018 study released by the University of Texas at Austin, exploring the relationship between presence of SROs in schools and learning outcomes, found that higher police presence in schools was associated with higher rates of discipline, lower rates of high school graduation, and decrease in college enrollment. Police officers are not the answer to school safety. We again thereby urge you to remove the SROs from their permanent position on campus and instead continue to invest in what makes students safer, meeting their developmental and mental health needs. As a community partner, the Moran Center welcomes the opportunity to be a part of this important discussion and take collective action to create a more just, equitable, safe, restorative, and anti-racist learning environment for ETHS students. Sincerely, Betsy Lehman, Board Chair, Moran Center Youth Advocacy Board of Directors. Our second public comment is from Nicholas Davis.
Pete,
Yeah.
I would like to make one clarification, only because I want a context for anybody listening in. This is not being rushed, and there is no action item on this today. We do want to hear the comments, but I don't want anybody, I heard that in that comment, and that was incorrect. There is no posted action item on this today.
Right, it's just a discussion. So discussion.
Okay. I'm going to return to the public comments. Number 2 is from Nicholas Davis, Evanston Township High School District 202 Board of Education. My name is Nicholas Davis. I'm an Evanston resident and ETHS alum. The purpose of this email is to encourage school board to end the practice of having SROs in ETHS. Research has been coming out for decades now, which shows the direct relationship between the presence of SROs in schools and students' increased exposure to the criminal justice system, thereby funneling them into the school to prison pipeline. While the 2 SROs in the school at the moment may thankfully not reflect what is typically for SROs across the country, they unfortunately are exceptions to the norm. The culture in policing since its inception all the way to the present day is one that does not align with the equity standards ETHS has committed itself to as a community. Knowing the relationship that police have with BIPOC communities, they are represented in the ETHS student staff population, is another reason for SROs to be not to be in schools. EPD City of Evanston data shows the EPD disproportionately over-police Black and brown neighborhoods in Evanston. They disproportionately arrest Black and brown Evanstonians, and they issue citations to Black and brown Evanstonians at a higher rate than white Evanstonians. With this data, we can see that having SROs in school in Evanston is counterproductive to not only achievement and well-being of students that is alluded to in many of the district's statements on equity and achievement, but it also is detrimental to the staff and building visitors who belong to communities where law enforcement oppresses. The between the districts and the city states, quote, ETHS recognizes that the discretion regarding whether to investigate or charge a student or other individuals with an ordinance, criminal, or traffic violation lies with the police officials, which as evidence was the above data, EPD cannot, as a department, conduct these investigations and file these charges without creating racial disparity. Evanston prides itself on being progressive, and yet we are behind the curve on this issue. Schools across the nation have been taking SROs out of their schools for years, all the aforementioned reasons and more. It is time for us to do the same. Nicholas Davis, Criminal Justice in Spanish, Temple University, 2017. Next public comment is from Isabel Beso. My name is Izzy Beso. I'm a rising senior at ETHS and have served on the SWORD board for the past year. I believe that school resource officers should be taken out of the ETHS. It has recently come to my attention that the contracted SROs are in the hands of the school board. ETHS has contracts with 2 armed Evanston police officers who are stationed by their employers in the city of Evanston to potentially serve problems that the ETHS safety staff doesn't want to have facilities for. The 2020 adopted budget for school liaison officers is $505,364. I'm asking the Evanston Police Department to stop policing Black and brown bodies inside of ETHS in District 65. The presence of police in a place of education perpetuates the systemic violence upon students of color and the cycle of the school to prison pipeline. I demand that both District 65 and 202 terminate their contracts with the Evanston Police Department in order to reimagine a space of liberation. Evanston school boards must take accountability and critically reflect upon the existence of policing in which Black and brown young folk are dehumanized. The quest for transformation takes self-reflection, critical analysis, and conversation alongside the action. District 65 and 202 must reinvest in new structures that foster places of love and create an educational, just space for students of color. Fourth public comment is from Lydia Weir. I'm an Evanston resident and I support the removal of the school resource officers from all Evanston schools. Rather than increasing safety, the presence of SROs in schools is linked to an increased number of suspensions, expulsions, and arrests. Increasing punitive and carceral measures does not lead to future success, but instead directly feeds the school to prison pipeline. SROs are especially dangerous Black and brown students and should be removed as soon as possible. Thank you, Lydia Ware. Next is Michelle Ellen Weldon. I'm an Evanstonian constituent and I strongly support the removal of SROs in Evanston schools. I've done work in Evanston schools, specifically in special education classrooms, and think our schools would be safer and better supported with the removal of SROs who only encourage punitive treatment and enable the school to prison pipeline. The sixth public comment is from Danny Profit Jr. Greetings, my name is Danny Profit. I'm an Evanston resident. I'm writing today to provide my public comments for Monday's meeting regarding school resource officers at ETHS. I write to ask you your vote to cut ties with Evanston Police Department and remove cops from ETHS moving forward. Policing in schools criminalizes and enacts violence against Evanston youth, particularly Black, brown, and Indigenous students. Having police at ETHS legitimizes a system that is at its core white supremacist, patriarchal, and classist, and it furthers the school to prison pipeline. Our children deserve to learn and grow in an environment free from people with a badge and a gun, and the discretion to control, contain, maim, and kill as they choose. Protect our youth, provide them the support and services they need to thrive and make this world a better place. Instead of cops, move to increasing the number of ETHS staff members who are CPI trained and expand wraparound supports such as mental health services, food and housing supports, and violence prevention. Sincerely, Danny Profit Jr. Number 7, our 7th public comment is from Sophie Degener. My name is Sophie Degener, and I'm an Evanston resident and parent of ETHS student, in my understanding that you will be raising the issue of SROs continuing their present role with Evanston Township High School. While there will be no public comment at Monday's meeting, I am writing today to communicate my absolute support for removing all SROs from Evanston Township High School. ETHS has the opportunity to join a number of progressive districts, including District 65, Oak Park River Forest, and several other high schools and colleges around the nation in removing SROs interaction from all non-emergency needs. Please also add to this action by increasing the number of ETHS staff members who are CPI trained and the number of mental health professionals in the building. The 8th public comment is from Kathy Graninger, and it's in regard, and she says, We sincerely hope that thoughtful and creative leadership team at ETHS will find a way to offer in-person learning this fall. However that looks, it will be better than an all virtual option. In our own household, our daughter, an entering freshman, experienced a mental health crisis during COVID-19 isolation. During her treatment journey, we spoke to several mental health professionals that shared COVID quarantine had affected many young people negatively. We were very pleased with the recent New York Times editorial board endorsement of reopening students to in-person learning. Reopening, yes. The implications of not doing so are devastating. The New York Times piece discussed the effects of closures on vulnerable populations specifically. Quote, the closure have also deprived students of time with friends, limited their access to reliable meals, physical and mental health care, and reduced the availability of supports for those with special needs. Students have been thrown back on the resources of their families, and in every dimension, those with the fewest resources have tended to suffer the most, a pattern certain to continue in the fall. RE, the issue of reevaluating security at ETHS building and potentially eliminating police from the security team. We believe well-trained police must be a part of the safety team at ETHS. The role of the police officer should not be criminalized to criminalize students to ensure much needed safety and secure protocols are enforced. A well-trained police officer can serve as a role model and mentor. At the same time, we support an increase in funding for mental health services in the district. Sincerely, Robert and Kathy Granger. That concludes public comment for this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Bevis. All right. The next item on the agenda is FOIA. We have 3 FOIAs in our packet. Dr. Bevis, any comment about them?
Yes, there are 3 FOIAs in the packet, Fag, Kennedy, and Slevin, and the responses are in your packet.
Okay, great. Gretchen, you have a question? You're muted. Still muted.
My spacer bar is not working. Okay, I sent a note to Eric and Pat. I'm just hoping that we could get the response to the FAG FOIA, F-A-G-G FOIA, which apparently shared some data on student attendance during the shutdown period. So I just wanted to let everybody know that I'd made that request. Thank you.
Okay. All right, next item is update on fall opening of school.
Well, hello, good morning, board. And this is obviously a very pertinent and important topic this morning. I'll just review some things that are totally obvious, but just to provide a context for the meeting. As you know, we announced on March 13th that we were, actually we announced at the evening of March 12th that as of the 13th, we were closing ETHS for a month due to the COVID crisis that was growing rapidly, not only in other states, but here in the state of Illinois. At that time, we knew that a month may not be adequate, but that included a week of spring break. So we were going to go to remote learning for 3 weeks and then reassess. The very next day, Governor Pritzker announced the closing of all Illinois schools. And since that time, we're all aware that Illinois schools did not reopen in the spring. At the last meeting, I discussed the guidance that the Illinois School Board of Education was issuing at the time. We were in phase 3 of the governor's plan when we shared that and shared a lot of the challenges that plan and those guidelines required of us. On June 30th, ISB, the state board, released what they call their part 3. They had given us 3 growing versions, and that was the final version for the reopening of schools in the fall. There have been about 4 different versions of that come out since then, with some modifications, but essentially what they provided initially has remained the same with clarifications. At that time, we were talking about all of the requirements that would be required of us. These align with the CDC guidelines. As many of us have been paying attention to this, the CDC has just within the last week indicated that it will not be changing its guidelines, that those guidelines may be clarified a little bit, but those are their guidelines to reopen schools in the country. So we've been working on the principles that we need to have a plan that it is specifically grounded in our goals 1 and 2, having to do with academic achievement of our students and having to do with the well-being of our students. Our guiding principle has been that, and you'll hear this again in this presentation, has been to maintain a healthy and safe environment for all our students and staff, to maintain our commitment to equity, to provide meaningful and engaging academic experiences when we reopen for all students, and to address the social and emotional well-being needs of our students and staff as well. What we're going to share with you today, and Dr. Campbell and Dr. Bavis and I, is the framework of the plan that we have been developing. We've had over 100 people. That's included some of the student voices. That's included teachers, support staff, surveys, and obviously leaders across the district. We will have that plan ready for release this Friday. So Friday the 17th, we will be releasing our school reopening plan for the fall for ETHS. We will be stressing in there, and I want to stress it right now, that it's going to have to be a living document, because we know that the conditions are changing rapidly with this virus. And so we have what we think on Friday will be a really good plan, but we also know that even if it's 100% in place as we envision it today on the 13th of July, within 2 or 3 weeks, there might have to be some adjustments. But we still want the board to consider the framework that we're working with. I want to begin by stressing that this is not a minor discussion. We're talking about life and death here. And I can't state it any more strongly. And so I can tell you that everybody who's been involved in putting this framework and ultimately this plan together has kept that in mind. We are going to do everything we can to avoid increasing the risk for students and adults who have to come into this building, and will be striving for a really good educational experience for our students. We have already surveyed parents and students once, but after we put out the plan, we will have an even more detailed survey for feedback about that plan. So that will be coming. We will this week be surveying our staff. After we discuss this framework this morning, we'll go to our staff with the framework and try to get, even though a lot of staff members have been involved in this, we're going to try to get comprehensive feedback about the plan and the framework that's being proposed. So in a moment, I'm going to ask Pete and Marcus to review this framework. Again, remembering that we are going to continue working on it the rest of the week, and we will have the plan on Friday the 17th for our entire community to review. But you're going to get a lot of details today, because I want you to understand where our mindset is and what we're finding we can and cannot do at ETHS. First of all, I want to say that we are going to have a hybrid, which would be a combination of in-person and remote learning in our plan. The CDC and the State Board of Education and the governor himself require masks. They require social distancing. They require no congregating of groups or people. And so we have really analyzed what this building can accommodate to have all of that kind of 6 feet apart social distancing while wearing masks. And what we've come up with, and you will hear it, is that we will be having a rotation available where students will be in groups A, B, C, or D, and they will rotate in for in-person instruction. And you'll hear more about that rotation soon. The other students on the day that one of the A, B, C, or D groups is in school, all other students are going to be online. And you're going to hear more about what we've done because we were not satisfied with the e-learning and online in the spring. And I'll level with you, my main dissatisfaction were all of the rules that the governor and the state board threw at us, that we could not really conduct a real school as such. One example would be grades couldn't count if they didn't raise your grade. Well, that's fine, but you tell a teenager that the grade you already had 3 months ago is fine if you don't want to come to school for the next 3 months. It was just simply it was trying to do what we could do, we, the state, we could do at the time. But the guidelines they gave us did not allow us to actually conduct real school. This plan is real school. And you're going to hear about real school. But we will have students here in blocks. On the days they come, they will attend the full school day. We'll describe how that school day is going to look. And that we will have what is known as synchronous learning. That is, while class is going on in the room with the in-person students in one of those rotating groups, the teacher will be online to everybody else in the class. They're all attending class. It's a regular school day, although we have it blocked out differently. It's a regular school day, and you attend school every day following your class schedule, the periods as they come. And the only difference is some of the time you're in the room with the teacher, so the teacher can get that in-person connection with all of their students, and other times you are doing it remotely. But these are going to be real school days. And you will get online with your teacher and you will participate in your school day just as the people who are in class are participating in the school day. We will have a component, and I want to put parents' mind at ease because we've heard from many parents about this. There will be an all remote learning option for parents who are fearful of sending their students into this setting. So they will actually be able to attend, they'll still have to attend every day and every period, but they will have an all remote option so that they do not have, and we have students with fragile health issues, we have students who have an elderly person at home, a grandparent or whatever, and we have parents who are scared to death to be sending their kids into a populated environment where they may bring that home to the family. So all these options are going to exist for all of our students. And I just want to emphasize that this will operate like real school. We're also going to be recommending, again, you're going to hear all of this coming up, but I want to give you the context and then we'll get into some of the details. We will also be not starting school in person until after Labor Day. We will start school in August as already scheduled, but everybody will be on remote learning. And then we will start the regular, the alternating, rotating in-person attendance after Labor Day. Why are we doing that? We've been shut down for months. We've had people retired or resign, and we have new teachers coming on board. We've been doing a lot of training all summer long, but our teachers are going to begin being in here each day. They're going to be in their classroom. When they're there in person, they're with the kids. And when they're online and everybody else is attending, everybody else is with the teacher too. We need to get our staff in here and get up and running. We need to make sure that everybody is clear about how to do this. There can be some, with masks and distance learning, there can be some collaboration going on. They can be interacting with their department chairs and the like. They can be problem solving. They can make sure they understand all the one-way hallways, that they can understand all the one-way stairwells, that they can understand how getting in and out of bathrooms is going to be limited, so that they can understand how it's going to function and be in this school for a short period of time to get acclimated while they are teaching. So school starts on the same date in August, but we will be all remote, getting everything up and running and everybody knowing what they need to do before we start bringing 1,000 kids at a time into this building. Remember, we have 600 employees. Some are on night shifts, but on any given day, a good 500 of those employees are here during the school day. You add nearly 1,000 kids to 500, that's still 1,500 people in this building a day for the in-person. And so one of the things that we are really serious about is all the adults in the building understand how it is going to work before we start bringing teenagers into this building who are going to need a lot of guidance on how to operate. Because I want to say to everybody, this will not be the old ETHS. This is not the ETHS that we left. And until we can guarantee the safety of all of these students, hopefully with a vaccine, but until we can guarantee the safety, we're going to organize this school according to how we can have a semblance of safety and meet those CDC and those State Board of Education requirements. And finally, I'll end here because I'll come back, but I want to say so Friday, we issue the plan. Today, we go through the framework with you because we need the board's input and make sure the board is okay with this. Friday, we issue the plan. Next week, on Wednesday, the 22nd, we will have a live town hall meeting. And Dr. Bavis and Dr. Campbell and I will be at that live meeting. It will also be recorded for people who can't attend at the time that it's broadcast. And we will be responding to questions and clarifying. But we will have had questions and ways to anticipate what still needs to be reconsidered between now and Friday. And we will have then release the plan, and we'll have further consideration on how this plan can be improved or at a peak efficiency, if you will. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our two pros who have been spending months and absolutely this entire summer with these hundreds of people developing this plan. And I want to thank them and everybody who's been involved. As you will see, in a typical ETHS fashion, amazing thought and care and concern has been put into this. Okay, guys.
Well, thank you, Dr. Witherspoon, and thank you to the board for your patience with us as we walk you through this process. As we've been following the national discourse around reopening, we know that this is very complex. This is very difficult. There are lots of moving parts, and we want you to just sort of bear with us while we give you some high level things and share with the community some high level things. And the details will, the devil's in the details, but we'll outline some more of those details throughout the week and by Friday. And as we outline some of these recommendations and plans and things we've been thinking about, is one thing I want everybody to keep in mind. Sometimes it's easy to say, why can't they just do this? Or why they can't do that? Well, we probably thought about it, and we've ruled out certain things just because there are so many unintended consequences when we're building a school based on the CDC guidelines and based on what we've gotten from ISB. And as Dr. Witherspoon mentioned, this is a very different school. This is not the ETHS that we left. So there's a lot to figure out. The first thing is, I'd like to reiterate the safety. The safety of our students and staff is our utmost priority. We have had lots of robust debate about how do we open, but how do we open morally and how do we open ethically to make sure that we can safely provide the kinds of things for our students and our staff while we attempt to run a hybrid school. And so I just want to reiterate that the safety of our staff and our students is a priority. It is something that we talk about constantly, incessantly, and the details and the high level things that we'll share with you this week are ways that we believe that we can ethically and morally open school in a crisis. So I just want to say that Eric mentioned the health and for our staff and students, our commitment to equity, engaging in an academic process, and lifting up the social emotional needs of kids and the staff. So with that being said, what we think we can do safely with 1.3 million square feet of space is to roughly bring about 950 kids in at a time. Eric mentioned the A, B, C, D rotation. 950 is about a quarter of our students. And we believe that we can provide the amount of social distancing and not having a lot of crowds in the hallway if we have about 950 kids. We're going to open more entrances and exits so that there aren't any sort of clusters of kids at the door. When you've been at ETHS for a long period of time and you see the traffic patterns, you kind of know where the traffic sort of begins to converge and where there are a lot of kids. And so what we're going to do is open more entrances and exits so that we can make sure that kids aren't crowding in the space. We believe that with 950 kids at a time, it allows for the buses aren't as crowded. We can socially distance in the cafeterias and be able to feed kids. Dr. Davis is going to go through a schedule that looks like that we're going to have to serve lunch all at the same time, given the schedule. So he'll share some more details about that. With 950 kids, we think that we can adequately social distance in classrooms and in various spaces around the building. So that's very important. We don't believe we can do more than that. There's some schools that are doing half of their population. We've had conversations about a third. It just really gets problematic. We are doing the best that we can to keep the number of bodies in this building down, where there is some semblance of school. One of the principles that we've learned in sort of having kids pick things up and for the summer and with lockers and things like that and books is that if it looks like ETHS is slow, like there's not a lot happening going on, that means we're doing it correctly. If it looks like there are crowds and people are around and there are long lines and people are huddled together, that means that we're doing something wrong. So I want to thank our Associate Principal, Robbie Brown, for all of his work in logistics with helping us to close the year. And we're using those same principles to open the year. We're also looking at a way for our students and staff to self-certify coming in before they come to the school. So we're going to provide some sort of digital means for students and staff to self-certify. And that means letting us know that they aren't aren't displaying even any COVID symptoms. We know that people can be asymptomatic, and that's just one of the tensions as we look at this reopening plan. But we're asking folks to self-certify prior to coming to the building. And if they don't self-certify, then we will engage in the certification at the door with the temperature check, et cetera. Visitors are going to be highly discouraged and by appointment only, and they will be screened and temperature checked upon arrival. But we do not want people visiting ETHS. We're only talking about essential visitors. We're going to be asking students and staff to scan in. We're still having some conversation about this. How do we scan in without drawing a crowd at the door? And we're looking to see if there is any other way that we can do attendance, which will provide us with contact tracing if someone becomes infected. But right now, we're looking to make sure the staff and students will scan in. I am going to turn this over to Dr. Beavers, who's going to talk about our remote start and the schedule. As Dr. Witherspoon already mentioned, we will have a remote start. School will start on the first day of school remotely, and for 3 weeks, we will not have any students in the building. As Dr. Witherspoon mentioned, we've been shut down for months. We really want to make sure that our staff are familiar with the procedures, so that because when staff are familiar with the procedures, it protects our other adults and it protects the students as well. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Beavers, who is going to talk a little bit more about the schedule and the academic portion of our opening.
Thanks, Marcus. I'm going to walk us through what enhanced e-learning will look like at the start of the school year. And keep in mind, we have the goal of having 950 students access their courses at ETHX according to a fixed rotational schedule. And we'll determine that around Labor Day, how that will, what those groupings will be and how we will begin to bring students in. But the first thing to know is that e-learning will be substantially different from what students experienced in the spring, when we had to make that transition to remote learning quickly, little advance notice. In contrast, and we were also underneath all of those guidelines from ISB around grading, assessment, and things like that. In contrast, enhanced e-learning will include a return to high academic expectations comprised of, well, we're going to take attendance and we're going to have a schedule, and you're going to be required to be on your device and Zooming or Google Hangout during class time. We're going to have a return to grading. We're going to grade using our A to F scale. We're also going to have these required live synchronous class sessions where students will meet with their teacher. And we're going to have a return to assessment. Assessment will be a little bit different because at any given time, 3/4 of our students will be working remotely. So we're going to approach assessment as though it were open book, open notebook, open internet. So that changes a little bit of how we assess students. It actually creates a more robust assessment profile for students and asks a whole heck of a lot more of them because we won't be relying on recall and lower order questions. We'll be asking more sophisticated questions that go well beyond a Google search. To that end, we've provided required professional development this summer for our teaching staff through our ETHS Learning Academy. So they'll be prepared to offer enhanced e-learning starting in the fall. And we were very, very clear on what those included. We have a unit for teachers on climate. How do you develop a climate and pay attention to student needs, connect to kids? How do you do that in a remote environment? Planning, we have a whole unit on planning. We have a unit on content delivery. What are the best, what have we learned about good, solid content delivery using a e-learning platform? How do you have robust discussions with students that are both synchronous in real time and asynchronous using discussion boards, Flipgrids, and things like that? Assessment is another unit that I just spoke about briefly. And finally, a unit on how to provide students with feedback, because we know in a remote, anytime students are accessing the content and their assessment and their schoolwork via online environment, anytime we know that we only have about 1/4 of our kids ultimately in front of us at a given time, that feedback becomes particularly important. It elevates the core principles of teaching, good assessment, good feedback. How do you do just-in-time feedback? How do you connect each kid to their learning throughout that time? Synchronous online classes will be required and will follow a bi-period block schedule. What we did was we built a block schedule that works both for students who are fully remote, students who are in the building, and students who are outside of the building in that hybrid model. So we've done that. In-person instruction will be delivered in a model that allows students to participate in person or remotely. Again, if a student and a family decides that they don't want to come to ETHS due to health and well-being reasons, that's completely fine. We will have a remote option available for them, should they choose that. The determination, we're going to have determinations of, now here's the thing. When we designed the e-learning and the block schedule, you might be asking yourself, why do you have this schedule that's not a 9-period day? Well, if you're at home and you're going through a 9-period day and you're going from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom, you're going to get Zoom fatigue pretty quickly. Okay. So we're not going to have a 9-period day. What we're going to do is we're going to have a block that says on Tuesdays, you'll have periods 1 through 5. And on Wednesdays, you'll have periods 6 through 9. There's a built-in break in the middle of between period, in the middle of the day for lunch, or we just call it a break, if students are working remotely that day. We also have built-in office hours on Wednesdays and Fridays. And that schedule, that block schedule is a Tuesday, Wednesday, and then it's a repeat on a Thursday, Friday. So what you end up doing is students will come in when we're on the hybrid model. You'll have 950 students here on Tuesday and Wednesday, meeting with their teachers, going through that schedule on those days. And then you'll have a different group of 950 students on Thursday, Friday. And every 2 weeks, you'll see all of your students. All of the students will be able to access and have time with their FaceTime with their teachers. And that FaceTime is really important. We envision that as being time to connect with students, time to have like a tutorial session, time to do some hands-on learning. But again, it's sort of like enhanced. That's another enhancement, because we also realize that 3/4 of the students' learning will be done remotely. So when you come in and you meet with your teacher, that's a special time. That's really a time to connect. Again, we're all going to be wearing these masks. So you're going to have masks on, which are very important. So it's going to be a different environment and a different experience for kids. On Mondays in our schedule, we're going to have office hours and work time. We're going to have student service supports offered on Mondays for students. And we'll also have later in the day, like we would during a normal school year, we'll have professional development time for our teachers. So that's how that's going to work. In terms of toggling between the remote learning, let's say, there's an outbreak, in the community and we have to pull back from this model. We have set up a series of internal and external indicators to sort of guide us. Some of those internal, I'm not going to list them all, but I'll just give you a couple examples. We're going to look at the number of students who are self-certifying and who are not self-certifying. This is a community-wide effort. This is a student-wide, we have to embrace, our students and families need to do that. So if we find out that half of our students are not self-certifying before they come in the building, that's an issue and would need to be addressed. The number of students, we're going to have a special area for students that are exhibiting symptoms so that they can be, if they come in and they're exhibiting symptoms, we will isolate them and we'll get them the appropriate parental and medical care. But we're going to monitor that number of students that are being referred to that space. We're going to also look at and take a really hard look at the number of students. This is extremely serious. The number of students who are wearing and who are not wearing masks. Not wearing masks is a non-starter here. If you're not wearing a mask, you're not going to be able to access the in-person instruction. We won't be denying you an education. You'll just simply have to work remotely. We'll put you on the remote learning plan because we cannot compromise the health and well-being of our students and staff. So again, it's to protect the health and well-being of our students and staff. That's why I held that mask up. It's extraordinarily important. And if we find that students are not doing that, that will be addressed. We're going to look at teacher and student absenteeism as another internal indicator. We're going to be monitoring our social distancing. The number of substitute teachers, our capacity will become a factor potentially. And those, if we reach certain thresholds on those, we would have to pull back and go remote, because that would signal that something is wrong. That would signal that there's a potential health issue and things like that. External indicators include, of course, Illinois phasing as determined by the Illinois Department of Public Health and State Governance. That's a big, that's an alpha indicator, right? If we all of a sudden end up back in phase 2, well, that tells you all you need to know. We'll also look at regional and local indicators, percent positive for testing and things like that to guide decisions. Those are our external indicators. And we'll have other indicators as well. I'm just sharing a couple of those with you. In terms of lunches and free periods, ETHS has this thing we call, the students affectionately call free period. And if anyone's ever had a student go through here, you know that what that is. Things are going to be different. I can't stress this enough. It's going to be a different experience. For one, we're going to be a closed campus for students. We're going to manage, cap, and assign students to specific locations in the building during free periods, lunch, and study halls. So students will be assigned to spaces. This is again to control the flow of students, to ensure we have no more than 50 students in any given large space. We're going to use multiple rooms for our lunch. We're not just going to use the cafeteria. We're putting online several other large rooms. Students will be assigned to those rooms for lunches. Again, this is a very different schooling experience that students are returning to. I can't stress it enough. The ETHS we had in January, February, and previous is not going to be the ETHS that students are going to return to. And that's just a logistical fact, with social distancing, with masks, with hand hygiene, with all of these things. But it's going to be a different experience for our students, and it's going to be a collaboration with our community to ensure that it's a success. I'm going to give it over to Marcus, and he's going to talk a little bit about integrating social emotional supports, talk a little bit about what can happen on those Mondays and how we're going to do that throughout the semester.
Thank you, Pete. And it's just very quickly that our counselors and social workers are going to continue to work with students as the needs arise. We are also looking to integrate more social emotional learning within the instructional because we're training ourselves not to think of, oh, academics are here, social emotional things are over here. No, they're actually integrated together. And having the social emotional pieces take the lead in how teachers think about lessons and implement those lessons. But counselors and social workers will continue to be available for students because as we remind ourselves or think about it, we're still in a crisis. And we've also spent some time this summer, with that said, we've also spent time this summer thinking through what is our crisis plan should we lose one of our family members. Our immediate family, what of our WildKid family members? And so this is such a large undertaking when we think about social emotional learning, because it is being that impact is being felt amongst our students. It is being felt amongst our staff, and it is our first and foremost priority when we think about the operational piece and getting people back in and talking through and doing the things that we would normally do. The social emotional framework and construct is really important for us. And we'll be talking more specifically about some of what those things are, because we're not going to be reactive. We are engaging in a proactive approach with, as far as the academics, with integrating social emotional learning, the counselors and the social workers, and unfortunately, what our worst case scenario might be should we lose someone. And I'm going to turn this back over to Dr. Witherspoon.
Thank you, Pete and Marcus. And of course, everything in this framework that we've discussed will have lots of details available and added to it in the written plan that will be coming out on Friday. The one thing before we discuss this with the board is I would just make an appeal to parents and to students. if we all work together on this, if we all do everything that's being asked of us, including wearing a mask whenever you're in this building, we can actually create a healthy environment so we all come out of this when it's over with ETHS not having suffered any of those consequences that we're reading about, which is not only the getting sick, which is desperate enough, which is possibly death for some people, which is scary as it can be, but which is also we're learning that there are what may even be lifelong health issues for people who have contracted COVID. They are seeing lingering and lasting problems with heart, with lungs, with even cognitive skills in people. We're not scientists, we're not medical researchers. We know that contracting COVID might have more implications besides surviving it. And we just don't want to be part of doing anything that would make the conditions worse. But here's my pledge to our students. If we can all cooperate and make this work right now, I really believe that we will see on the horizon, it might not be until next school year, but we will see on the horizon where we will be able to get back to our beloved ETHS in the way that we really want it to be and know is the best way for it to be. And with that, we'll open for any comments, questions that the board may have.
Thank you for that, for setting that up so well. I just appreciate all of you. So I see Gretchen's hand, and let's take questions.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Eric and Pete and Marcus. I really can't even imagine how much work has gone into trying to figure out the logistics of our building, our really, really large student population, and how to balance all of the concerns here. And I really appreciate your overview. I thought it highlighted virtually everything of importance, but I have a couple of questions. The first thing that comes to mind is I think it would be helpful at a future meeting to hear from directly, or perhaps you can get some more information from the health professionals who are in our building. And I'm principally talking about physical health, not so much the mental health piece, which you did touch on. So for example, the folks that are in our school clinic and in our, the North Shore certified health clinic, those two separate spaces that deal with health issues in our building. And I think this is important because I would like to see reinforced at every opportunity. I think all three of you did it, but I think it also is important to come from a health professional to reinforce at every opportunity with our students and our families and our community, the importance of all of the basic precautions around masks and hand washing and all of those things. I really think our community has done incredibly well in this regard, just based on, this is anecdotal and my experience out and about. But I honestly don't think we can stop messaging around that important point. And so I would like to see a health professional at our meeting running through some of this stuff, talking about its application within the school environment, and just reinforcing that. I think it's easy if your family hasn't been touched directly in any way by this to dismiss it and to get a little more casual, especially in this good weather. I think people are getting together more outside, and even though they're doing it from a distance, it may give us a little sense of normalcy, but there are also risks associated with all of that. So I think it's important. And then relatedly, I am wondering, we have a student who shows up who hasn't self-certified, and they have a fever, a high fever, whatever. I understand that we have a space where we can isolate them. More importantly, though, I think for the functioning of the school is, what about all the kids that student was sitting in the classroom with the previous week, if it's been a week? I mean, how are we handling, or let me also toss out, a teacher says, hey, I'm not coming in today. I have this terrible fever, and maybe I've even already tested positive for COVID. What do we do? Aside from, obviously, those people aren't going to come in anymore, or you isolate them. I get that piece. What else are we doing to make sure that this doesn't turn into something much bigger?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So first of all, we would wait for COVID testing and for making sure if it is COVID. Because people, we have people with those kind of symptoms pretty often in a high school. They have influenza, they have a cold, not generally a fever, but maybe allergies. They're just different things that come up. So we would take the precaution, but then we would wait for the result of either testing or a self-quarantine for the 14 days. That would just be required. If we learn of a positive case in the school, we will immediately go to the Department of Public Health and the health officials for guidance. We would certainly assist them with contact tracing if they asked us to do that, but we would definitely follow their guidance. But I will say that we do have to be aware that it's not incomprehensible that there could be an outbreak here. And obviously, if there is, we go immediately to full-time remote learning until we have further guidance from health officials. Isolated cases, we deal with Department of Public Health. In multiple cases, we would go to remote, and that's one of the reasons also that we're going to get remote right first, prior to Labor Day, because there is no way to anticipate this school year without remote learning as a component. We've already described the rotating schedule and all, but if there's a surge, if there is an outbreak within the school, we already know that we would have to go to remote learning until we had more information and the situation were stabilized.
So thanks, Eric. I think that makes sense. I get that we would follow the Department of Public Health guidance, and I just think it's something, obviously, that you have to be prepared for that eventuality for sure. So my last question, I don't mean to dominate, is I like your priorities. We've talked about academics and social emotional health, but a question that's going to be top of mind for many, many families is extracurriculars and sports. And I know that's a whole different can of worms, and I don't know how much time you have to devote to it here. And I know, for example, that we are already doing, training over the summer and so forth. But in light of the fact that, college football seems to be sort of in a slow fold, maybe you could give us some high level stuff on sports.
Yeah, I will. So there have been no guidelines come from the state on sports during the academic year. They are allowing a certain level of conditioning and workout following strict guidelines. And I would suggest that there's probably no school being more true to that than we are. I mean, not that others wouldn't be, but we're really taking that seriously. But there has been no guidance. And that has been changing. So for example, the IHSAA put out a document maybe about a week and a half ago. And the Illinois Department of Public Health looked at that document and came back and really added more restrictions. It was just really clear the health concerns are going to have to drive those decisions. So yes, those are the kind of issues that are still all schools are going to have to grapple with. But I will tell you again, whatever the best practice safety issues are, that's what we will adhere to. We're not going to try to cut corners on that.
So what I'm hearing you saying is we have to wait because we really don't have very clear guidance right now. I mean, it sounds like it. Is that right?
That's right. And by the way, I'll even say it out loud. When the Ivy League and some of the other major colleges are canceling fall sports, that may have a huge impact on decisions that are made nationwide before we actually get into a fall sports season.
Well, and that doesn't even include, for example, some of the problems that have cropped up with professional sports, because that's not going real well either.
And Lake Zurich, they had an outbreak among a football team already. So yeah, they're and again, that's why we really want to take this cautiously, because it's better to do that than to get way out there on things just because we have some internal confidence that has no basis and then realize that we got way too far ahead of this situation.
Cautiously, and recognizing that things could look very different in the next few weeks. So, you know, a month out, we will have more data and experiences that we can draw upon from other places. So Pat, I see your hand up. Thank you for waiting.
Thanks, Pat. Well, again, I just want to thank Marcus and Pete and all the people behind the scenes that really have just lived and breathed this whole situation and really thought about everything in terms of planning. So I'm really grateful to you as always for being so thoughtful, for keeping our students' health and safety in mind, and our staff, as well as our equity focus. So I'm really grateful to all of you. Just a couple quick questions. Eric, you had mentioned after you put out the plan on Friday that you were going to do a detailed survey of staff. And I think you mentioned that you were also going to, again, survey families and students. I just want to clarify if that's true.
That's true. In fact, after this discussion, we wanted to get the framework in front of the board and make sure that we're okay with the board on the framework. But we'll actually then survey the staff beginning today, because now they have something tangible to think about and give us feedback on it. We will wait until after the plan goes out the 17th. Again, and parents and students will have a much more tangible, detailed look at what this plan is. And then we want to survey them really about their reactions and even things we're going to be very interested. Will you send your child to school? And so those are the kind of things we're going to have to find out.
Great, thank you. And then my other question is, just briefly, if you could talk a little bit about the areas that are in general are much more in-person dictated, like PE and some of our special ed students and our day school. Like, can you talk a little bit about what some of those areas will look like at a high, can you just talk about it at a high level for us?
Pete and Marcus, why don't I start and chime in? So first of all, according to CDC recommendations, students will not have access to their lockers. They will not have access to physical education lockers. And they will, our belief at the moment is they will not dress for physical education, that there will be social distanced activities for our students, but that we are not going to start contact kind of experiences, and we're not going to start putting students in a position where maybe there's a concentration of somebody shedding the virus. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at right now. And since I forget the rest of the question, Marcus or Pete, why don't you jump in and I'll remember what the rest of that was, Pat.
About the day school and some of our more,
yeah.
So we're working with special education to really determine student by student how we can meet those needs, because that's just the only way to do that. We've been speaking with our day school staff on a possible schedule, and we have been speaking with that mirrors the ETHS schedule to some degree, although it won't be exact because the number of kids is different. And the same with our, we really trying to understand what is the impact on our DOP program. And so we are having these conversations, and those decisions are going to be made on a case by case basis. We understand that there are safety issues involved there, but also making sure that we, give that student an education. So, and given the guidelines, this is a very, very difficult thing to reconcile, but we will do it. And but that's probably going to be on a case by case basis and not just on a program as a whole.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. I wanted to just find out a little bit more if Dr. Campbell, if you could speak to, and maybe Dr. Bavis, if you could speak to the ways that you incorporated data from last spring and sort of the remote learning that you sort of had to do a bit, suddenly. How did you utilize that data in creating? I'm just interested because I've just heard sort of parent and student feedback sort of broadly through the community about, how they experienced remote learning. And I'm just curious to what degree did you utilize that information or that feedback from, families and students to inform, and also teachers for that matter, to inform sort of some of the changes and the improvements that you made. I'd like to just hear a little bit more about that process. And then I have a couple of other questions.
Pete, you want to talk about that from the academic part?
So we learned a lot about what didn't work in the spring. For example, we learned that students needed to have regular contact with their teachers via Zoom or Google Hangout, whatever. We use the Zoom platform. We found out that was very important for keeping kids connected to school. We also learned that having a regular schedule was very important for students. So the asynchronous kind of thing didn't really work well for many, many of our students, because what it said was essentially that what that privileged was students who had high executive functioning. And many of our students, adolescents, teenagers, don't have high executive functioning. So that was one hurdle. So we took a lot of this information from our teachers and our students. And what we did was we went and we built a summer school program where we could test out some of these things. So we built in a regular schedule where the classes would meet. We built in-class Zoom sessions that had to occur. We required that. We required a return to grading. We know from many of our students that once the fact that your grade couldn't go down was a demotivator, right? We learned that routine was very, very important. So in summer school, what we did was we had a daily schedule for kids. Teachers published, when they would Zoom within that block of time, what the expectations were. We also learned that having to navigate, and I'll speak to this just as a parent, having to navigate Google Classroom, a teacher sending out email assignments, another teacher maybe using a different platform. It was too much to manage. It was managed, but it was too much to manage. I'll just put it out there like that. So we've decided to use a uniform platform. We're going to use Google Classroom for all of our teachers are going to use that to push out assignments, to house their assignments, to do all of that. It's a one-stop shop. It's going to be uniform. We did that in summer school. We're going to continue that. That again is part of the training that's occurring right now. The live interaction, so very, very important. The use of breakout rooms so students can connect with each other. So very, very important. The idea of a weekly schedule for kids, not just a class schedule, but a weekly flow to like how the classes will go down, like when our assignments, due, how does that work? Just being extraordinarily transparent about that. The idea of building community was very important. One of the things that's very different going into a new school year versus the spring is that in the spring, our teachers had built community in their classrooms at a minimum for one quarter, but many of them, through the course of 3 quarters of instruction, getting to know kids. And then we had the COVID shutdown and the remote learning piece. We don't have the benefit of 3 quarters of contact with our teachers to build community. So we are integrating community building into the fabric of our e-learning. We did that in summer school. We're going to do that again, and we're going to do that even better going into the school year. And those can be low-tech communications, just the presence of our teachers, and again, putting those kids in community with one another, very, very important. And we're going to be we're very direct about what that expectation is, and we've built that into our training this summer. And finally, the feedback piece, extraordinarily important for that feedback. What we learned in talking to our teachers was that when we went through those Act of God days where assessments didn't count, that was another challenge for us, right? We had the beginning of this whole thing was nothing counted at all. So, if nothing counts and then things count, that messes with kids too. So, but what we learned is that feedback became extraordinarily important during that time frame. The ability to connect to kids, providing regular feedback on their performance, not just grades, is a shift. It's a fundamental shift. One of the things you used to say in school is that grades provide feedback. Well, I'm not sure if they provide feedback or if they're terminal, right? A kid sees a grade and that's their grade. Whereas feedback, having a conversation with the teacher via Zoom or getting written feedback on your Google document or through Flipgrid, like that kind of feedback on your performance so that it's actionable, kids can develop based on that feedback, that became very, very important. And we're integrating that into we integrated that into our summer school program a little bit, but we're actually going to really accentuate that with our training so that we do that over the summer, and then we prepare folks for coming into the school year. And you'll realize that all of those things I just talked about they're critically important in a remote e-learning environment, but they're also critically important in the classroom. They're critically important in a hybrid model, and they're equally as important as everybody that comes to school, regular school model. So it's an opportunity really to anchor folks in these practices and really enhance not just their online instruction, but their instruction, their connection to kids overall. So thank you for asking that question. And that's sort of how we took that. What wasn't a very good positive experience for many of our kids and our faculty, and we've been able to adjust. We ran it in summer school. We've learned again from summer school what some of those things are that we need to really enhance and those things to continue and those things to throw away as well. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. And I also realized I neglected to preface my question with profound appreciation, because everything that you've been talking about, all of you have been talking about so far, is just demonstrative. And I can only begin to imagine how much work has gone into this and how much work will continue to go into this. It's really phenomenal. And, I just have great appreciation for all the work and all your expertise that has gone into, thinking about these things on such a granular level. And I imagine, in terms of feedback, you probably have, mechanisms in place to continue to perfect and refine, because this is a learning environment for everyone. And so I hope that feedback will be continuing. I know one of the things my daughter, and I'm reassured very much to hear my daughter's a junior, going to be a senior. But one of the things that she felt was that there were, the ability for students to give feedback as well as for teachers to give feedback to students. I think it's important for students in this environment to feel like they're being heard and that their teachers are flexing and moving and receiving and responding to how the students are doing and what the students are talking about, what their experience is in this new learning environment. So I think it really does need to be a two-way communication between teachers and students. The other question I have is sort of more logistical and just in terms of resources. And I'm curious to know, with a hybrid model in a lot of these classrooms, and I know all of these classes and subjects are different and have different resource needs, but I'm curious to know how, for a teacher to teach a group of students in person, face-to-face, as well as students remotely, what does that look like in terms of planning for that, in terms of resources, in terms of providing technology that can accommodate both audiences? How is there any sense of how that's going to impact our technology budget or other budgets that we, other allocations that we have for this? I'm just curious to know if there's any sense of that at this point.
Well, I can take that. I mean, one of the things that we realize is that we have to expand our bandwidth and our ability for our firewall to handle traffic, because what we have then is conceivably every teacher second period working, sending out information to their students via a Zoom. Let's say you're meeting with let's say you start class with a Zoom with everybody, right? You do your daily assignment. Then you're going to check back in on the Zoom. While that's going on, you're going to get the kids over here, the in-person group going and running. That uses a lot of bandwidth. So we're committed to we've invested in expanding our bandwidth and our ability to do that. It's a lot easier when you have a quarter of the kids, 950 students in the building, and not half of the students in the building or all the, it becomes this, it's this math engineering problem, right? How can you optimize that? So that we have committed funding to that. We've talked with our tech folks, really worked closely with our technology folks. And in fact, on the instructional side of that, this week, I've convened a group of teachers and David Chan from Instructional Technology, myself, Scott Bramley, to kind of sit down and carve out some guidelines, some very clear guidelines and parameters around, what that will look like instructionally for folks. Because what we don't want is, there's certain scenarios you don't want. Like, you don't want the kids to come in and you don't want, as the instructor, to put up a video and make everybody watch the video and that's your lesson. That kind of diminishes the quality of that in-person experience. So we're going to develop a series of guidelines on how do you do that? How do you integrate that? That's going to be a pretty nice thing we're doing. The other thing we've provided for our teachers is the option, and this is completely optional, for them to say, let's say they're delivering some super important content one day, they can record that content, record that class, and then they would house that for the school year. So let's say a kid couldn't access the content remotely that day, they could go in and then access that. So that's kind of what that's our latest thinking on this. And again, that wouldn't be required, that would be up to the teacher, but it's another way to think about instruction. So you offer the synchronous piece, but then if some kid student for some whatever reason couldn't be there that day, they wouldn't fall behind. So we're building in some safeguards along those lines, and that's just one example of a whole bunch of things we're looking at.
Thank you very much.
So I am going to have to, I hate doing this, but I'm going to have to jump off this meeting because I have another meeting that started at 10. So I'm going to pass the facilitation over to Monique. And before I go, I really do want to also express my deep appreciation to Eric and Marcus and Pete and the other 97 people who have been involved in this plan. I know that you've been working really hard, and I can hear how very thoughtful you have been and really thinking, continuing to think about every piece of operations in this district. It's just so very complicated. And I understand just from some of my work around the community, how complicated this can be, how it just, one decision snowballs into 50 others. So, and this is the same. So we'll continue to talk about this. I'm really sorry to miss this meeting, but I can go back and review the rest of this meeting and take care. If there are other questions, there may be more. I don't know that we've exhausted this topic, but there may be more questions.
Okay, thanks, Pat.
Sure.
All right. So we're still on the update. Are there any more questions on reopening?
I have a quick question. First, I did want to say thank you so much to Dr. Davis and Dr. Campbell and everybody else. This is clearly such a thoughtful and smart program that you've laid out here. It's beyond what I was trying to imagine it would look like. So I just want to thank you so much for that. I did have a question about teachers. Will teachers have the ability to choose to do only remote learning if there are reasons that they can't or don't want to enter the classroom environment?
Are you going? Okay, I'm looking at Eric to see if he's going to talk.
I was starting to talk. Did you want to go?
Go ahead. I'll follow you, Eric.
Okay, great. One of the things that we will have to find out from teachers is what their personal situation is, and given this kind of a model. Obviously, we have to have our teachers, and we can't do in person if the teacher is fully remote. So that's one of the things that is a next step, and our team is already all cranked up to start getting that specific information this week.
Thank you.
Yeah. So teachers won't have an option, but it's going to be determined on a case-by-case basis, given doctors' notes and whatever it is they are producing on human resources.
Okay.
I have a question.
Okay.
But of course, first of all, I just want to echo everyone's comments and express my deepest appreciation for your leadership, Drs. Witherspoon, Davis, and Campbell, and the staff that worked on this. I mean, being in education myself, I mean, you guys are really approaching this in a responsible manner. And I know it's not easy because, as you said, Eric, this framework has to be a living plan where there's so many moving parts, as you said, Marcus, and there's so many unknowns. But I think we can, this community can rest assured that the leadership of this district is making decisions based on the well-being of staff and students. And I think you guys clearly demonstrate that. My question is logistical in terms of movement in the building. So it makes sense that as students spill out into the hallways, the likelihood of risk goes up. Has there been any consideration for like maybe a staggered bell schedule to minimize the amount of students who are traveling to and from class in the hallways?
There has, and it turned out that given the in-person model as well as the remote, we couldn't make it work, Mr. Laudet, and I'll explain why. We could stagger letting people out of their room, but if you're going to another class that they were staggered to get out later, there might be a line at that door waiting to get in. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to, and we don't have this all figured out, but we're going to get some system going with our teachers so that, because there could be as many as a dozen students in that room, 6 feet apart. We have rooms that would accommodate 12 students. Not all classrooms would, and we'll have to work that way out. But there could be 12 students in that class when the bell rings. We're going to have to work with our teachers, and probably on their hallway. This is another thing we got to work out when they're in here before Labor Day. How do you dismiss your students so when they leave the room, they can start falling into the one-way hallway 6 feet apart? And that's going to be one of those things that we're going to have to really work out, probably hallway by hallway. Because obviously if the bell rings and 12 students get up and all walk out, but across the hall, 12 more all get up and all walk out, pretty soon, you know, we have a bunch of people shoulder to shoulder. So your question is right on target. We did think about that. And when we figured out that the staggered bell schedule wouldn't work, we decided instead we'll work on it, you know, hallway by hallway, so that students can file out of the room in a safe way.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. And I know you guys have probably exhausted so many different ideas on how to do things, as you said before, but another consideration could be to have the teachers travel instead of the students.
Well, the problem we have with that would work in younger grades, but the problem would work, the students in one class may go to 12 different classes next period. And so there's no way that the teacher can go and find that group of students just because of the way with all the electives and, you know, 250 courses to choose from and all of that. But I would really suggest places that have more self-contained classrooms where the same kids are all taking math next period, or the same kids are all taking science next period. Absolutely. You know, trying to have the teachers move to the kids would make so much more sense. We just couldn't make it work with a multi-section school. And that's, by the way, but thank you for bringing that up, because for people who say, well, I hear they're doing this in that school, or I hear they're doing that. Yes, but this is a big comprehensive school with hundreds of sections and hundreds of courses. And so what might work in not just even younger kids, but might work in a high school that, you know, there are high schools in the state with 150 kids. And so what might work there, and by the way, and don't have all the courses that we offer. And so that's one of our issues is how do you do it with such a complex place?
Well, again, this is why you guys do what you do, because I'm sorry, Dr. Campbell.
No, you're good. You're good, Jim. And remember, we're still only talking about 950 kids, right? So that's the volume in the hallways and the volume in places that are usually pretty intense won't be that intense because we just can't have that many students in the building. So just a reminder that we're still talking about 25% of our kids across 1.3 million square feet of space. Now we will, as Eric mentioned, we're going to have some entrance and exit procedures that teachers are going to have so that is a controlled process. But we're still, the reason why I'm able to breathe and say this and go to sleep at night is because we're only still talking about such a small group. But 950 is small to us.
Yeah, I think, yeah, great conversation. I think, as Dr. Campbell said, the devil's in the details. So, you know, when I hear social distancing, when I hear reduced number of students, when I hear different traffic flows and more entrances, then you are actually doing everything you can possibly do to lessen the spread, because COVID is in Evanston. So it's in our community, which means that each institution has a responsibility to lessen the spread. And you can only do that if you're following the strict guidelines, which it's not easy to do at all. So I commend you all for taking all that information in and trying to figure out what works. And as Eric stated, continuing to see what's working and what's not working, because it is a continuum. It's not a done document. Things will come up and you'll have to make adjustments. And I think as much as we, want this to go away, I think we have to realize that this is a pandemic. It's not an illness. It's a great pandemic that has affected our community, that has caused us to shift everything that we do from this point on. And we still don't know everything. So I know how hard this lift is. I appreciate you all doing this, and I continue to just pray for our community as we go through this. And I know how important the decisions are that the school districts are making, not just ETHS, but 65, because the decisions you make will definitely influence the entire community. So it is not an easy lift. How parents work, what their work schedule looks like, what organizations look like and how they plan. So this is huge. So thank you. Thank you all for sharing this information and for the continued conversations that you'll be having. I think that town hall conversation is really good for our community.
Because we do need to move on, because we're going to lose
Yes.
people. But may I add just one other thing you made me think of when you said that, Ms. Parsons. The new superintendent of District 65, Dr. Devon Horton, and I are in very close contact with one another. We have already developed an amazingly good working relationship. It's just really gratifying. But we even just have one-on-one Zooms where we can just talk with each other about this. So obviously he has considerations that I think are ours are highly complicated at the high school level, but he has to think of first and second and third graders. I mean, he has even another set of concerns. But I did want you to know that the two districts are very much in communication on this.
Right. Okay, we're going to move on. Another important topic, and this is just a discussion. I think we need to clear that up, but this discussion is around the safety at ETHS and source SROs, so school resource officers. So Dr. Witherspoon, do you want to take this?
I will, thank you. Yes, we know that this has become a very discussed topic. And so we wanted to talk about our situation here at ETHS. And what I really want to do today is make a huge distinction between ETHS, RSROs, and how they contribute to this school and are not in any way bringing systemic racism into this school. They are not in any way bringing abuse of young people into this school. And they are indeed an amazing asset to our school. They do contribute to our school culture. We make sure that when a SRO comes on board, and they're usually assigned here 2 or 3 years at a time, so they really there's a commitment here. We really make sure that they understand from the get-go the culture of ETHS. And I think most of you recognize that we have been working very hard to create a culture of belonging, a culture of loving, a culture of student voice and of respect for our students and adults in this building. That we are a highly student-centered school. We are a very welcoming and embracing school. I will tell you already, and I'm reading about some of the other area schools, many of them, and I know enough about them, do not have a school culture like ETHS, to just be perfectly blunt. A year ago, there was a film about a high school in our country. And I watched that, and in one of the early episodes, they were showing students coming into school, and they were coming into some kind of a surge area. It looked like a very large, beautiful lobby from what I could tell. And I remember thinking to myself, there was a school resource officer there, fully uniformed, who was barking orders at the kids and da 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 da. I remember when I saw that, I just shuddered. I thought, I couldn't imagine allowing that for 1 second at ETHS. Not for 1 second. And so this is long before the issue started being discussed. And I looked at that, and I'll be honest, it just made me wince. And it made me realize how different we are from other high schools around us and in the country. But I do want to make this clear. We know that this has become a national discussion. We understand why. We understand concerns about systemic racism in police departments in this country. We understand that a lot of people who just didn't know are now seeing videos and who are now seeing things that are shocking them. And for the first time in their lives, they realize what people of color have been saying. For the first times in their lives, they really have a visual understanding of something that maybe they knew in a cognitive way, or maybe they didn't really embrace it at all. And thank God that we have entered an era of that kind of recognition and understanding. It is hundreds of years overdue, and it certainly hasn't been erased. And I will tell you now, if there were one semblance of a systemic racism in this school in utilizing school resource officers, they would be gone today. That's not ETHS. And thank God, that's not the school resource officers who are assigned to ETHS and who have come here ever since I've been here over the last 14 years, who understand this is our culture and this is what we need from you. And thank you to EPD, they send us the right kind of people. I can't speak for every officer at EPD. I can't generalize about every officer at EPD, but I can speak about the SROs who are assigned to this school. And they are not the problem. And yes, there is a problem in this nation. And I would encourage all of us to be aggressive in trying to address the problem and do something about it for the well-being of every human being and every person of color in this country. So what you're going to hear from us is how we utilize SROs in this school. I can tell you that we are not a typical high school in this country. We are one of the larger schools in America, with nearly 4,000 students, about 3,800 or plus, and with 600 adults. We have easily 4,500 people in this school each day, plus the many, many people who come to provide extra services and that. It's most common that there are probably anywhere from 4,500 to 5,000 people in this school on a given school day. Google the average size as a town or a community in America. And we are larger than most cities and towns and communities in America. We are a small city. And we have issues just like any small city might have. But guess what? We don't use our SROs to be arresting kids. I will tell you that what we've been able to ascertain so far, and we'll get this right. We think there was one arrest for some very grievous behavior of a student at this school last year. 5,000 people a day times 165 days. And we think there might have been one arrest. That's not how it works here, folks. Because this isn't the purpose. The purpose of this school is to have people here who will protect us, people here who can intervene. Because believe me, when bad things happen, we've got one of two options. Right now, we've got a great option. SROs who understand the kids, who work with the kids, who come here every day to advocate for the kids and to keep them out of the criminal justice system. But if we have to start calling 911, I don't know who's coming. And once they get here, I can't be telling police officers how to do their job. It doesn't work that way. So I'll tell you right now, I'd rather know who I'm working with, what the expectations are, and how they serve us than calling 911 and taking my chances on who gets sent to this school. But believe me, when something of danger is happening in this school or something criminal, we're not going to sit here and leave this school unprotected. I hope people in the community know me well enough to know I love these kids. I love them. But I know that part of my responsibility is to protect them and to keep them safe. And you think about Maslow's hierarchy, if they don't feel safe, if they aren't safe, all other things that need to happen in a school, including learning, will not happen. So we're going to describe a little bit how they function in this school. And we're going to be sharing with you what their role really is, as opposed to what people have this generalization about what their role is in schools across the country. And I'm going to repeat and then turn it over. I've seen how they are utilized in some other high schools. And I am appalled, and I believe that they have no purpose in being there. So Marcus, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Eric. We certainly, we haven't spoken, but the way you just started was the way I was going to end.
Do it anyway.
I will. As a Black man raising two boys, both of whom are upstairs, probably just waking up, I get the conversation. I get the discourse, and being well acquainted with the school to prison pipeline and the research on the school to prison pipeline, looking at the SRO's role in that, I am very happy to note that ETHS does not engage in those practices that is reflected in the research. It's not a binary for us. Our journey of racial equity has led us to have these conversations over the past couple of years as far as how do we engage students, how do we keep them safe, and how do we not perpetuate some of the systems and structures that have been historically perpetuated and given to us. And for a long time, we've been working to reduce the number of suspensions. We've been working to reduce these patterns, and we still have a ways to go. I want everybody to recognize that we don't feel like we have arrived in any shape, form of the imagination. We still have a ways to go. And part of our philosophy in engaging in restorative practice is to have people who is in part of the badge be a part of those practices. And we know that there's over-policing in schools. We know that kids are feeling like they are constantly under surveillance. We know that in some districts and some schools, there's a criminalization of adolescent behavior. When I see in the research that kids in elementary school are suspended for having or arrested for having a temper tantrum, that is totally unacceptable. When I see that kids in some schools are arrested for writing on their desk with erasable markers, those kinds of behaviors disgust me. And that's the practice in a lot of places, right? And these come out of these zero tolerance policies of the 90s, where we feel like districts feel like they have to clamp down on kids and police and patrol kids. That is not happening at ETHS. Our SROs do not patrol the hallways. They do not patrol cafeterias. They're not around like that, right? You won't see an SRO in the hall asking a kid to do anything. If they're in the halls, they're in the halls with myself and Dr. Witherspoon and other teachers and staff just to get to know the kids, right? Because our SROs, they show up to support our theater programs and our fan programs and our basketball program, well, our sports programs. And so it's a very different kind of relationship. And that is because that is the tone that this leadership sets. And the part that Dr. Witherspoon mentioned that I was thinking about yesterday and just reflecting on the whole conversation is, if we for 1 second thought that an officer in our school was openly hostile, racist, aggressive with their kids, we wouldn't need anybody to tell us to get rid of those SROs, right? We would have done it. We would have done it ourselves. And so the SRO, the relationship that we've had with EPD and the SROs, not just the 2 that we have now whose bios are posted on our website, but the ones that we have had. And I have to be honest, and I have shared with Chief Cook and I have shared with Chief Eddington, former retired Chief Eddington, that I have been very pleased with the types of people that show up to serve our school every single day. They have been the kinds of men and women that you can trust behind that badge. And those are the people that we have been fortunate enough to work with. I remember a conversation with Alderman Holmes in Braithwaite some years ago, talking about the kinds of people that they wanted to see in the SRO positions in schools. And that's exactly what we got. And I am grateful for the folks who show up each and every day to support a positive school culture and climate for us. So one of the things that you can do, or folks can do, is to look at our FAQs that we have on our SRO program. You can see that our SROs are not engaged in managing student behavior. That is a function of our deans. You won't see a teacher sending a kid to the SRO's office or an SRO coming to pull a kid out of a classroom. That was 10 years ago, and we said no. We're not going to be engaging in those behaviors anymore, because they're problematic, they're wrong, and they're racist. And so we've been on a journey with this. Not to say that our past practices have always been perfect, but we have definitely been evolving, and we've learned some of these lessons over the years to bring us to a place where we're engaging, SROs are engaging with us in a restorative process. They don't, as I said, they don't supervise the hallways. You can see why they have to wear body cameras, and they're very intentional about when they turn those on and off. The SROs are involved in our restorative practice. I think it is a very powerful image to see an officer working with the family or working with students. Is usually with a student or a cohort of students. The SROs are also working with families to resolve whatever conflicts that are bubbling up in school, bubbling up in the hallway. So I am, very pleased in our relationship, and would not want to just simply be at a place where that we don't see that we would have a need for a presence like that in our school, because some matters that come up in our school are police matters, and they just are. And as Dr. Witherspoon mentioned, I would much not rather call 911. Would much rather have people who are present, who know the kids, who know the culture, who know how we operate and do things, to be responding to that. And the last thing I'll say is this. I don't know if it's true, but I'm hope it's true, and I'll probably have to do some research. I don't think there's any other school in the country that offers a public safety course that the SRO co-teaches like ours. And Pete's going to talk a little bit about this. And we're not talking about like, oh, the SRO is going to come and give a guest lecture. No, we're not talking. We're talking about a real partnership where our SROs have partnered with our public safety course to actually teach kids, because that is their relationship. And I'm going to hand this over to Pete to really talk about what that role is and what it looks like and how that is consistent with our other practice. And the last thing I'll say is this: we recognize that there are kids who have a lot of externalizing behaviors that kind of lead them to have high recidivism in the dean's office. That is why we have worked really hard to engage in more restorative practice and to hire social workers or people with some clinical background as our deans. We just had a dean retire, and the new dean that we've hired has a background in counseling. So we see the need. And also, prior to this conversation, we've engaged and have done some restructuring in our AIT program, our academic intervention program, and we've hired 2 new social workers, both women of color. Very proud to have them joining our staff. And so we get the need that a lot of kids who engage in these externalizing behaviors don't need to be criminalized. They don't need to be arrested. They need mental health support. And that is what we are offering for our students. Pete, will you talk about the public safety course?
Yeah, just briefly. Yeah, our SRO, Lois Spells, teaches. Essentially, it's a co-teaching model, similar to other co-teaching models in the building. Co-teaches our public safety course, where we have students who've expressed an interest in a public safety career, be that in the police force or EMT or the fire department. He's taught that since he's been here. He's done a phenomenal job. Again, it's interesting to me to hear this, because when I think of our SROs, I think of them as an essential piece of the school. I think of them as a part of our well-being team for students, but also as teachers, which is also critically important. So much more goes into their role here at ETHS than in other places. And just to echo it, those folks aren't in the halls, police in the hallways yelling at kids to get to class. The difference is our SROs are in class teaching, which I think is a stark distinction between the typical view of SROs. I'm also just have a couple of data pieces I think could nuance this a little bit. I don't have any data on arrests, and I mean that's not data that we would keep, but we're looking into procuring that data from the city. But I do have like our 5 essentials data, which all of this data has been reported before. But 92% of our students report that people at ETHS are friendly, and more students feel safe in our hallways than feel safe coming to and from school. I think that's a really significant piece of data. 88% of our students feel safe in the hallways, and the number is 76% of students feel safe coming to and from school. So students feel safer here at ETHS. Again, is it causal? Is it corollary? I don't know. I'm just putting the numbers out there in terms of students feel safer within the context of ETHS. Again, another piece to think about is our graduation rate. Our 4-year graduation rate is 92%, and our 5-year graduation rate was 94%. Students graduate from ETHS. Again, if we were, and that again disrupts that prison to pipeline kind of piece. Our students, we keep our students here. We graduate our students. Students feel safe here at Evanston Township High School. And to isolate race and look at our freshmen, 93% of the freshmen last year, Black male freshmen, earned 12 credits or more and were on track to graduate and had actively participated in their post-secondary school planning. Again, we make it's a complete sort of wraparound kind of support system here at ETHS, and our SROs, although they're not wholly responsible for this, they are a part of it in a positive way. Again, I would leave you with the distinction at other schools. You see the SROs in the hallway barking at kids, with orders. At ETHS, that SRO is actually teaching in a classroom, not doing that policing in the hallways at all.
Okay.
And with that, I'm going to turn it over.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Witherspoon, Campbell, and Davis. We are going to just open this up for a discussion, but I want to make sure I just state that this is a process. Like, you don't just talk about this one time, something like this that's extremely important and sensitive to our community and our school, and think that's it. So we're going to start engaging in this conversation. And if there are any questions or anything that my colleagues would like to ask, we can do that now. And then plan to continue this, I'm sure, over time, but we can start at least the dialogue right now. Any questions? Gretchen, then Pat?
Thanks, Monique. This topic is hugely important. There's so much swirling around in not just our community, but across the country right now. I don't know if there are SROs in other parts of the world, but it seems like it might be uniquely American phenomena. I worked as a defense lawyer many years ago. And so I've certainly had some interesting interactions with police. And I can appreciate the concerns that have been raised. So as I'm sure those who are watching know, we've gotten a lot of emails in the last 24, 36 hours from people who are really concerned in the community about SROs. It's interesting to me that, and I want to touch on some of the particular questions raised in those emails. I really appreciate that people are weighing in on this. I would be more interested in hearing about more particular concerns with SROs, because sending me an email that asks us to get rid of SROs from the school without any detail, and there's sort of this form email that we're getting. It's not as helpful to me as I would like it to be. For those who are writing to me, and I'll be honest, I haven't read them all because they were coming in, during this meeting. Actually, emails were coming in, right? If you are a student or a teacher or a parent, and many of the email writers are, don't just tell me to get rid of SROs. Tell me about the interaction you had with an SRO at our school. Don't speak to me generally, because I think Marcus and Eric and Pete have all done a really good job articulating why we are different at ETHS. And we are different not just around SROs, but we are different in a whole bunch of ways. So if there is a particular issue that we need to be concerned about with our SROs, I want to hear about it. I want to hear about all this. I have no objection to getting these emails at all. In fact, we can go 10 meetings in a row, one of which, by the way, was to discuss the memorandum of understanding with the city about SROs not that long ago. And nobody emailed me at that time about it. And we did have a little bit of discussion. I opened up that discussion at that meeting about SROs to ask some questions about it. So the broad brush, let's get on the bandwagon and get rid of SROs, just isn't as helpful to me as a more thoughtful discussion. However, each of these emails, which have, and there are some that have been a little more in depth, and the Moran Center email I thought was useful and thoughtful, and I respect, admire, and appreciate the work of the Moran Center very much. But there are a couple points I want to ask about. I'm sorry I think this is a really important topic. I want to hear from all the rest of the board, so I don't want to take up too much time. But some of the issues raised in the emails I've received have been, we need CPI training. Crisis Prevention Institute training, crisis prevention training. So I want to hear about that. Is that something we should do? Do we do it now? If not, why not? Number two, I think you've already touched on increased social work support. So I think Marcus or Pete just mentioned that we've hired some more people. But I think it's not just in the last year that we've hired more people. That's been, you know, over time, we've made an enormous change in sort of those sorts of support. Number three, Eric touched on this briefly, as did Pete. How many arrests have been made by SROs in the school? Not just last year, but the last 5 or 10. Ideally, as long as we've had SROs. How often has that happened? I mean, there's just, we have to have that data. And we have to have a system in which we get that data on a very regular basis so that we can monitor it. I mean, that's what the school board is about. We're about accountability. And relatedly, what are the stats on the positive interventions by our SROs? What are the situations and how can we track, if we don't already, the situations where SROs have made a positive difference with our students and intervened to prevent an arrest? Now, I understand it's harder to prove a negative, so this is maybe difficult to get our heads around, but I think we could get creative and think about how that's happening. Not just a list of like, they go to the sports events, they go to this, they go to that. I don't need a list of activities, but let's really think hard about where they've made an actual intervention. And then lastly, I would like to know, not just from that 5 Essentials survey, but in a student survey and staff survey, you know, what do you think of the SROs? How are they impacting you? Are they impacting you positively or negatively? And room for comment. And that should be a regular question. And in this way, I think we can operate from a place of knowledge, informed understanding. I think our board is extraordinarily well-versed in issues of equity. We've worked over the years since I joined the board 11 years ago to have conversations around issues of race and equity. We've worked diligently over the course of many boards and many years to make dramatic changes in our disciplinary process. You know, this has been a long trajectory, and we have generally moved in the right direction. And I think that we can continue to do that, and we can be open and receptive to input from our community. And I can appreciate why this issue has popped up right now, given what's going on. I am extraordinarily sensitive to the concerns and the real stuff that's going on there. But the things that go on in districts around this country are not things that are getting replicated here in the same way. And we need to be really careful about making those broad brush kinds of generalizations. In the same way, we need to be careful about making them about any group, any racial group, any group at all. So I would just insert that word of caution, but we need some stuff still. Thank you for all that time.
Pat?
Sorry, I was unmuting. Thanks, Monique. Yeah, and I agree with what Gretchen said in terms of needing more information specific to us. So a couple questions, and I'm not sure we're ready to, that the administration would be able to do this right now, which is fine. I think Monique's right. This is not a one-off conversation, but longer. But one question I had is what, in addition, Pete mentioned that the SROs teach, they're not in the halls barking at kids, but are they in the building all day? And what does that day look like typically? You know, maybe they're teaching 1 or 2 periods a day. Maybe they've been called into the dean's office. I'd kind of like to get a sense of what it looks like, what their day looks like, and what kinds of things they're brought into, when, how often, what the results are. Because, you know, one of the concerns is that, you know, a surgeon sees every problem as needing a scalpel, right? So, you know, they're trained police officers. And I have to say that reading about our SROs, our current SROs, they seem fabulous. And I completely trust Marcus and the administration. If they say these people are who they are, that's great. I believe you 100%. But I think we have to think systemically too about just having armed, dressed, you know, officers, uniformed officers in our building. What is the impact of that? So a question is around their day. And then, as Gretchen mentioned, I really want to hear from parents and students, but especially students, because I've obviously, we're all paying attention to this issue, and just sort of reading the research, there's a lot of indication, particularly for Black male students, that just their presence in the building is something that's stressful. Now, you know, we could dig into that, and maybe it is that those examples where those Black males responded that way, they were in a situation where there was a heavy-handed SRO where they are barking at them and arresting them with regularity. But maybe it's just their presence. And so I think we want to understand that a little bit. And I really want to hear from the students, all students, but especially students of color who often have had, outside of our school, experiences with police officers that just their sheer presence in their building might be something that's stressful to them. So I think this is a very important topic. And I want to agree with Monique that this is not a one-time conversation. This is something I think we need to think about and kind of build in to our, you know, whatever we decide down the road, but we should be really paying attention to this with data and with information from our students. So, thank you.
Jude?
So as we engage in this conversation, because this is a community-wide, nationwide issue, I think we should remain mindful that this is not about an exception. We have to think globally. This is about deconstructing systems, practices, and policies that have traditionally been disproportionately impactful in a negative way to the Black and brown community. That's why Senate Bill 100 exists. The mere presence of an officer in a building, in a school, can impact subconsciously students that don't feel safe around police. And that's a societal issue. ETHS cannot shoulder the blame for that, but we can be part of deconstructing those systems. Ever since I've been on the board, I've spoken a lot about restorative justice because it's part of my life. It's what I do. Mainly, I've done it on the west side of Chicago and the south side to some extent. And it's rethinking how people can exist in spaces where they can feel safe and be their authentic selves. And an individual, a scholar, a student, who may not have had negative interaction with police, however, maybe their father, their uncle, their brother has, they may have witnessed traumatic events. Those can be triggers. And I think we really need to take a hard look at this data, disaggregate it. I would really like to see the level of engagement with students and disaggregated by race. Because some students may feel safe, others may not. And as it relates to equity, the goal is for all students to feel safe. I think we really need to take a hard look at that data. I think it will, whatever it reveals, we need to help it inform, whatever final decision that we come up with. And Marcus, as you said, I too am a Black man of 3 sons. I mention this quite often. I'm in my mid-50s. And when there's a police squad car driving behind me, subconsciously, it impacts me as a grown man. How much more children that are growing and developing. So as a matter of fact, I'm very familiar with one of the SROs. I know his character. I lifted him up at the Black Family Rally. I mentioned him as an individual who will get up at 1 and 2 in the morning to come see about our children. It's not about individuals. Of course, it's gonna look differently in Evanston because typically we are very progressive. We have our fingers on the pulse of societal issues, and we continue to do that. All I'm saying is that we need to consider that this is a global, national issue going on, and the youth are driving this conversation. And with that being said, Pete, thank you. You're always very forthcoming and resourceful with the data. But also let's be mindful that with the 5 essentials, typically Black and brown students aren't very responsive to that. So where are we getting our information, and is it really accurately reflecting all students within the school? So just some things I want to, just put out there for us to consider as we continue to engage in these conversations in the community and within the district.
Thanks, Jude. Thanks. Any other comments or questions? Liz?
I want to thank everybody else for bringing up a lot of the concerns that I had as well. And I did just want to mention that ETHS continues to fall within the top 20% of racial disproportionality in discipline, according to ISBE. And so I think we need to always just stay vigilant of this. I don't know if it's a matter of SROs or if it's the deans or something else within our discipline policies that is continuing to put us in the top 20% of having these disproportionality. But I also wanted to ask, even though we do have great SROs right now, inevitably in the future when we have a turnover, how do we know what kind of SRO we would be placed with, and how much control does the superintendent have in choosing who that person is, or any control over who our SROs are?
That be quickly answered, or do we want to just?
Well, I can quickly answer that.
Okay.
We have no control who's assigned. We do have control to reject anybody that would be here that would simply not be acceptable to us.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah,
Stephanie?
I thank you, Monique, and thank you everybody, my colleagues on the board, for your insightful and very meaningful thoughts and questions. I do agree with Monique and all of you that this should be a conversation that we should continue and be very committed to continuing and explicit about having with our community and with one another. I'm thinking a lot about systemic racism and how we, to Jude's point, absolutely have to look at this in totality, in a holistic, global sort of sense. And be mindful of that and factor that into our thinking and into our considerations. And at the same time, systemic racism can only be really tackled at the ground level and at the community level, and at the individual level. I mean, we all have our spheres of influence and our, roles to play in dismantling systemic racism. And, I think about ways that we are taking sort of a systemic problem. And, just to use an example, this idea of working with EPD, it doesn't come out of our budget. To have an SRO in the building, yes, we can have, rights of first refusal. On the other hand, maybe there's a way to think about this that's not systemic, which is to take a situation that exists in the, system and in the structure and in the relationship between EPD and ETHS, and actually say, wait a second, how are we going to have some kind of safety presence in our building that isn't armed, maybe, or isn't here for a 3-year term and just rotating through? How do we actually take more control and more thought into developing a relationship that's more based on what we need and what our students need and what our community needs, rather than just working within the existing system and taking sort of what the system gives you, which is a 3-year term, an armed officer, a variety of other, problematic, perhaps, characteristics that we just deal with. And I think that's part of the way we have to do that with, work locally, think globally, in answer to this problem. And I don't have answers, and I'm not suggesting any answers, but I am thinking a lot about, the fact that we have an opportunity here to really be very, very thoughtful and have a meaningful discussion and make some meaningful change and be responsive to our community and to our students and to one another. That's disruptive and compassionate and forward thinking and healthy and takes all of that into account. So that's all I would say.
Just to feed on something Stephanie said, and correct me if I'm wrong, all you administrators, our agreement with the city around the SROs involved a little bit of the kind of discussion I think that Stephanie is suggesting we maybe have more of. And that is, we agreed, ETHS, to hire a career planning and placement person as part of our deal with the city funding the SRO contingent at the school, because we were recognizing that we're here to support our students. We're not here to have police officers just roaming the hallways. So the idea was to get somebody at our cost, to expand our capacity to address those, employment opportunities for our students who may not be going to a 4-year college in particular. Am I right about that, Marcus? I saw you nodding.
I remember that being the case, and I'm looking at Eric to see if he remembers that too.
I don't think Eric heard us.
Eric, are you there?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't hear what that question was.
So as part of our deal,
I'm right now working on trying to make sure we don't get cut off at 11.
Yeah. I know it had something to do with really understanding what we discussed and negotiated with the city of Evanston.
Uh-huh.
And my recollection, Eric, is that we, ETHS used our own funding to hire an additional career planning and placement person. And while at the same time, the city was funding the SROs. So in
Yes.
other words, it's not just that, we're not just looking for a freebie from the city on this. We had some thoughtful discussion around what our students' needs are, what our schools' needs were, how we could work as a community to come up with a way to fund that all together. And I was just looking for you to confirm whether that was.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Sorry, I made you repeat that.
No, that's okay. I'm just not.
Much don't want us to get cut off.
Yeah.
Yes, you're totally correct. First of all, the school district doesn't pay anything for the SRO. So if they go away, it's not like we have money to hire another social worker or anything. We don't have that money. But we do employ an employment counselor. We added an additional one at that time internally, and now we're also funding the employment counselor through the mayor's employer task force as well. So we're actually now have two additional positions that we're funding that are all designed to help nurture our young people into careers, into post-secondary, so that they don't leave here without assistance for where they want to go next in their lives. And you're 100% right.
Okay, so before we have to, I don't know, we may have to switch because we still have some business to conduct. I just want to highlight how I appreciate working with this diverse group, especially when we have to really have conversations, and we've had a lot of them at Evanston Township. This is not new for us to have these courageous conversations around racial justice. And, for me, I've always, ever since I've been on the board, I've been a part of the discipline committee. So for me, there's layers to this. So just defunding the police doesn't do it for me. It's defining what that looks like, but there's layers to the experience that our children should not be receiving regarding policing. And that starts with how we develop behaviors and relationships and create a sense of belonging from our deans to our safety staff to our SROs. So it's broader than just SROs. I want our students, all of our students, to have a positive interaction with responsible, caring adults. But I also want them to get the resources they need to be emotionally, social, emotionally, mentally healthy, and as students and as becoming young adults. So I'm looking at the entire system, and I have questions about the entire system. How do we support the entire system as we see it as, building relationships and correcting behavior, intervening in behaviors? Because for me, again, it's not just RSO, it's the connection points along the way, so that we are not creating a system or a pipeline. That's critical. We cannot be in that business. So Lisa, do we need to log off at 11:15, or can we just go as far as we can? I think we're moving on to action items, but we are definitely, for the community that has stayed with us to listen to this conversation, this is the start of a conversation. So if you thought we were making a decision, that's not how we work. We're going to continue to have this conversation and dialogue and continue to address some of the concerns that have been lifted. But it's not over. It's not over.
So Lisa, you said that there is a backup if we need it, correct?
There is a backup if we need it. If we're cut off of this meeting, you received a calendar invite that you could use. I'm not certain if we're going to be cut off. If we are, then we have that backup.
We have very little left to do.
Yeah, let's
I suggest we do that.
Let me let me just say real quickly, can the public, because
That's
it's a
what I
public
wanted to say.
meeting,
Yeah,
And-
let Eric,
Beset
Yes.
to make sure that we post that new link in case we get cut off, so
right.
public can also access it. So it's
Gretchen,
all-
let Eric give the direction because I know we've been chatting back and forth. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Thank you very much. So we will also have our IT people, if we get cut off, they will immediately repost another link where people found their first link and they can come right back on. So it won't be a new meeting, it's just a continuation of the current meeting. I think we're going to be all right though, so I just recommend let's push on.
Let's roll. Well, now we're on action items of the agenda. So let's see. The first one is the COVID-19 reopening plan approval resolution. I need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Vote. A question? Okay.
Yeah, so I understand the recommendation that's coming from the lawyers. I participated in a million of these forensic webinars, which have been really amazing. Hopefully others are participating in those as well. I'm generally fine with this concept, but what I want to really emphasize here is the school board needs to be in the loop. And I am okay with this idea that the superintendent will communicate with the board president. The board president needs to make certain that she's then communicating with us. And frankly, my preference would be that whatever communications the superintendent is having with the board president should just be communicated with the entire board at the same time, to that point that, no board member is above any other board member. What gets communicated to one should be communicated to all. That whole point around good governance that we've, after we've done all the ISB webinars, I would be more comfortable with that language. This spring was hectic. It was a tremendous amount of work for our administration and our staff. The school board was a little outside of that loop. And I want to make sure that the communication is coming to us in a sort of regular and timely way. So I don't know, if you want to comment on that, Eric, or if you can give us some reassurances as a board about how we're going to maintain that tight communication. I would just appreciate a little more, I don't know if reassurance is exactly the right word, but I think you get my drift.
The answer is yes, for sure. And we will also make this a standing item on the board meeting agendas going into this school year while we're on such an abnormal, if you will, situation. So absolutely.
I really do appreciate that. And I know these are difficult times. I'm not seeking to increase anybody's workload. I just want to make sure that we're able to have that back and forth. And, the SRO discussion today is a good example of how we're able to have that kind of communication with one another. And we can only do it in these open meetings. So, it makes, I know I'm extending our usually very short summer meetings, but these are times when I suspect our summer meetings are going to go a little longer anyway. So thank you.
Yep.
Call for a vote.
Laude,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Mansell,
Yes.
Parsons,
Yes.
Rolowitz,
Yes.
Teterich,
Yes.
Okay, approval of press policy issue number 103. Motion?
So moved.
Second.
Question? We've seen this several times, so call for a vote.
Laude,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Mansell,
Yes.
Parsons,
Yes.
Rolowitz,
Yes.
Teterich,
Yes.
Okay. Consent agenda, which includes approval of painting contract, approval of carpet contract, approval of asbestos abatement contract, approval of minutes, June 8th, 2020, closed session meeting, June 8th, 2020, regular meeting, treasurer's report, May 2020, the bill list, personnel agenda, appointments to staff, certified support staff, status change, educational, maternity, paternity leave, certified, resignations, certified and support staff, suspensions exempt. Call for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Call for a vote.
Alday,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Monsell,
Yes?
Parsons,
Yes.
Rolowitz,
Yes.
Teterich.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Any old or new business? A lot of new business. Any old business? This is the longest summer AM meeting in my school board history that I've ever attended.
You
Um,
too. Woo.
Gretchen, oh my goodness.
Mine
Yeah,
too.
that would be huge. All right, then I think we did well. A lot of information. Thank you, staff, and call for an adjournment. Or I guess we can just adjourn.
I move
right?
we adjourn.
There you go. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.